She was an empress who hid her face from the world. Imagine that. An empress, a figure meant for display, for portraits and grand public appearances, who chose instead to vanish behind a fan, a parasol. Empress Elisabeth of Austria, known to history simply as Sisi, was a puzzle wrapped in silk diamonds. She was celebrated as the most beautiful woman of her time, yet she loathed the public gaze. She lived in the grandest palaces in Europe, but her spirit longed for the wild freedom of the open countryside. Her life was a performance, a role she never wanted, and she spent decades trying to escape the stage. This is not a simple fairy tale of a princess who married an emperor. Not at all. This is the story of a woman who was thrust into a world of rigid rules and suffocating expectations. She was a poet, a horsewoman, a traveler, and a deeply sensitive soul trapped in the machinery of the mighty Habsburg Empire. To her subjects, she was a distant, almost mythical figure. To her family, she was a source of constant worry and frustration. But who was the real Sisi? To find her, we must look past the glittering portraits and the official histories. We have to follow the faint whispers she left behind in her poems and letters. The legend of Sisi is full of contradictions. So let's pull back the curtain on this most mysterious of empresses. Her story is more fascinating, more complex, and ultimately more tragic than any fairy tale. Our story begins not in a grand palace but in the Bavarian countryside. Elisabeth, born in 1837, was a child of the Wittelsbachs, from a quirky, less formal branch of the family. Her father, Duke Max in Bavaria, was a character. He preferred the circus. He preferred zither playing. He disliked stuffy court functions. Sisi and her siblings grew up with a sense of freedom. They rode horses, they climbed hills, they wrote poetry. Sisi was a shy, sensitive girl. She loved nature more than anything. She was never meant to be an empress. She was not even supposed to marry one. The plan was simple. Helene was the chosen one. Helene was groomed to marry their cousin, young Emperor Franz Joseph. Summer of 1853, Bad Ischl, formal engagement. 15-year-old Sisi was brought along, an afterthought. Gangly, awkward, mourning a puppy love crush, dressed in a simple frock, expected to stay in the background. Her sister would charm the emperor. But history had other ideas. He would only marry Elisabeth. A thunderbolt, a golden cage was being built. Sisi was about to be locked inside. The wedding in April 1854 was a spectacle of imperial grandeur. Vienna was alight with celebration as the 16-year-old empress made her grand entrance. The people were enchanted by her youth and her breathtaking beauty. They saw a fairy tale princess. But behind the veil, Sisi was miserable. She felt like a show pony, paraded through the streets for the cheering crowds. The Hofburg Palace, her new home, felt less like a palace and more like a prison. It was a labyrinth of ancient traditions and rigid rules, a place where every glance and every word was scrutinized. For a girl who craved privacy and freedom, it was a living nightmare. Her husband, Emperor Franz Joseph, was deeply in love with her, but he was also a man consumed by duty. A bureaucrat in a uniform, waking before dawn to work through mountains of state papers. He loved Sisi, but he did not understand her. He could not comprehend her deep unhappiness or her need for something more than the role of empress consort. He was a product of the very system that was suffocating her. While he saw the court as the center of his world, Sisi saw it as a cage. She was desperately lonely, isolated in a foreign land, and surrounded by strangers who judged her every move. She wrote in her diary of her deep despair, feeling like a bird trapped in a gilded cage. As the years went on, Sisi found ways to rebel. She could not change the system, but she could defy it in her own unique ways. Her rebellion was not political, it was deeply personal. It was a fight for her own body and soul. She started with fitness. In an era when ladies were supposed to be delicate and frail, Sisi turned her private chambers into a gymnasium. Rings pommel horse dumbbells. She would spend hours each day on rigorous exercise routines, honing her body into a state of athletic perfection. Her love for horses became another powerful escape. She wasn't just a casual rider. She was one of the most daring and skilled equestrians in all of Europe. She would spend entire days in the saddle, undertaking grueling, dangerous hunts. She rode astride like a man, which was scandalous for an empress. In England and Ireland, she found a community of fellow horse lovers who admired her for her skill, not her title. On horseback, she wasn't Empress Elisabeth. She was just a brilliant rider, free and fearless. Travel became her ultimate form of rebellion. Sisi was a comet, blazing her own trail across Europe. She was creating her own world, a republic of the mind, where she could be the person she wanted to be, not the empress she was forced to be. From the moment Sisi arrived in Vienna, she found herself in a silent, bitter conflict with her mother-in-law, Archduchess Sophie. It was a classic clash of personalities made worse by the power dynamics of the court. Sophie was the real iron fist of the Habsburgs. She was intelligent, she was ambitious, she was deeply conservative. She had orchestrated Franz Joseph's rise to the throne and believed it her duty to preserve the dynasty's power and prestige. In her eyes, the free-spirited, emotional Sisi was a threat. She considered her daughter-in-law childish, foolish, utterly unfit for the role of empress. The battleground was Sisi's own children. When Sisi gave birth to her first child, Sophie, the Archduchess took immediate control. The empress was deemed too young and flighty to be a proper mother. The nursery was placed next to the Archduchess's chambers, and Sisi had limited access to her baby. During a state visit to Hungary, despite the advice of court doctors and Archduchess Sophie, Sisi insisted on taking her two young daughters. Both girls fell ill, and little Sophie, aged 2, died. The grief was immense, and it was weaponized against Sisi. In the end, Sisi lost the battle for her children, but she won her independence by leaving the battlefield. In the 19th century, Sisi's beauty became the stuff of legend. It was her most famous asset and her heaviest burden. She was tall, slender, with a tiny waist tightened by corsets, but her crowning glory was her hair. Magnificent, a thick chestnut mane that reached her ankles. Daily care was an elaborate ritual taking several hours. A special hairdresser was employed combing braiding while she studied languages. Fallen hairs were shown to the anxious empress on a silver tray. This obsession went beyond hair. She became a slave to her beauty. Her diet was extreme: beef broth, milk, oranges. She had her waist measured daily, proud of a 19-inch circumference. After her early 30s, she refused portraits. She banned photographs. In public, she hid her face obsessively. That only increased her mystique. Beauty became a mask she feared would slip. For all its outward glamour, Sisi's life was threaded with profound personal tragedy. The loss of her first daughter, Sophie, was a wound that never truly healed. It cast a long shadow over her relationship with her other children, from whom she was often distant, through her travels, the court's interference. But the greatest sorrow of her life was yet to come. In 1889, her only son and heir, Crown Prince Rudolf, was found dead at his hunting lodge in Meierling. He had killed his young mistress, Mary Wetzera, before taking his own life. The Meierling incident was a scandal of epic proportions that shook the monarchy. The death of Rudolf shattered Sisi completely. He was the child she had fought the hardest for, the one she felt a deep intellectual and emotional connection with. From that day forward, Sisi wore only black. The vibrant, rebellious empress was gone, replaced by a grieving mother, a Mater Dolorosa wandering the earth. She called herself a seagull, forever flying with no place to land. The crown Sisi wore had always felt heavy, but now it was a crown of thorns. In the late summer of 1898, Sisi was traveling, as she so often was. She was in Geneva, Switzerland, staying at a hotel under a pseudonym, hoping for anonymity. On September 10th, the 60-year-old empress walked the shore of Lake Geneva, with her lady-in-waiting, heading toward a steamship to depart. It was a bright, clear day. Sisi wore her customary black. It was Luigi Lucchini. In one swift movement, he ran at Sisi and stabbed her in the chest with a sharpened stiletto, a thin, needle-like file. Sisi stumbled and fell, but was helped back to her feet. She thought she'd been punched. Worried about missing her boat, she kept walking the 100 or so yards to the gangplank. Only after boarding did she collapse, and died shortly after.